I will tell you what we are. We are Vorrkai. We are born in litters of three on the high scree fields of our HOMEWORLD, where the wind comes in cold off the ice shelf and the prey moves in dense, panicked herds through the lower passes. We are pack animals. We do not bond to individuals of other species. This is not stubbornness. It is physiology. Our bonding chemistry is narrow, species-locked, calibrated over 10,000 generations to anchor us to our own kin and to no one else. Every xenobiologist at VETH station knew this. Every handler who came to our enclosure in the first months knew this. They wore armor anyway. They were, in that sense, correct, though not for the reason they thought. I am SEKET. I am the alpha of the litter they designated K3. My siblings are ORU, who is the longest of us and the fastest in open ground, and Thresh, who is the runt in the only ways that do not matter: smaller scales, broader paws, a face that looks, by Vorrkai standards, almost mild. Thresh is the most dangerous of us. The station researchers never understood that. They kept measuring my shoulder height and writing notes. I will tell you what happened in the first season, so you understand what came after. The handlers came in pairs, always in full containment kit, sealed joint armor, resonance dampeners on their wrists to suppress the subsonic range we use for pack calls, face shields that turned our reflection back at us so we saw ourselves instead of them. The armor was not offensive to us. It was simply a signal. It said, "I do not trust you and I am prepared." That is a language we understand. We answered it correctly. We stood at the far wall and watched them set down food and leave. We ate when they were gone. This arrangement lasted 4 months. The handlers wrote in their logs that we were acclimating. We were not acclimating. We were waiting. Then the station went understaffed. A respiratory outbreak in the outer ring housing block. 3 of the 7 regular handlers on medical restriction. A 4th transferred to the new HAELIK pens when a specimen shipment arrived 6 weeks early. The station warden at the time, a methodical, cautious DREVATHI female named SOREKVIHN, looked at her staffing roster and found one name with no current assignment. DAVINRAEL, a human male transferred from the frontier colonist pool, listed under his qualification coding as General Animal Husbandry, 41 years of logged experience, no formal xenobiology credentials. She assigned him to us as a stopgap. He came the first morning without armor. I want to be precise about this, because the absence of armor was not in itself the thing. Plenty of beings have walked into predator enclosures without armor out of overconfidence, or ignorance, or a philosophy about dominance communication. We can smell the difference. Overconfidence has a particular cortisol signature, sharp and slightly acidic, that comes from a being who has decided they are safe. Ignorance smells like nothing, a flatness, an absence of the right chemicals because the right threat recognition pathways were never lit. DAVINRAEL smelled like neither of those things. He smelled like someone who had made a decision about acceptable risk and then let it go. He came in through the service entrance, carrying a long-handled fill scoop and a sealed container of water supplement. He walked to the trough at the east wall, not the center of the enclosure, not toward us, not performing any kind of approach that the handler protocols we had observed would have recognized as a bonding attempt. He filled the trough. He checked the feed ledge. He noted something on his wrist pad. Then he walked to the corner where the light was warmest, sat down on the floor with his back against the wall, and took a small tin cup from his coverall pocket. He poured something into it from a flat flask. He drank it. He did not look at us. We looked at him. Thresh moved first. Thresh always moves first when the situation is ambiguous, because Thresh has a quality that ORU and I, for all our speed and size, do not quite have: a capacity for stillness inside motion, an ability to be near something without pressing it. Thresh crossed half the enclosure floor and stopped 12 body lengths from the human and sat down. The human glanced over, made brief eye contact, looked away. Thresh waited, then sat closer 8 lengths, then 5. The human did not move, did not tense, did not reach out. He refilled his cup. By the end of that first morning, Thresh was 4 body lengths away, and the human had gone back to his wrist pad, making notes on something that had nothing to do with us. When his shift ended, he stood, pocketed the tin cup, picked up his tools, and left. He came back the next morning, filled the trough, sat in the corner. By the end of the second week, ORU was sleeping with his long head across the human's knees during the midday rest period, and DAVIN-RAEL had started bringing a second cup. I was the last. I want to say this plainly. I was the alpha and I took the longest, not because I was more cautious, but because I understood better what it would mean. A VORRKAI alpha does not give weight to a thing without understanding that the weight is real. ORU pressed close because ORU loves warmth. Thresh chose proximity because Thresh is curious and the human was an interesting problem. I stayed at a distance and watched for 3 more weeks because what I was measuring was not the human. I was measuring what the human wanted. Every handler who had come before wanted something. They wanted compliance. They wanted proximity metrics for their logs. They wanted to demonstrate that their bonding protocol was working. The wanting was in their movement, the slight forward lean when we stepped toward them, the cortisol tick when we moved away, the way their breathing changed when Thresh sat near the glass and looked out at them. They needed something from us and we could feel it, and it made the distance permanent. DAVIN-RAEL sat in the corner of our enclosure for 6 weeks and wanted nothing. He filled the trough. He checked the feed ledge. He sat with his tin cup. Sometimes he spoke not to us or not exactly to us, but in the way that a being speaks when they are simply present and the quiet has gone on long enough that some sound is natural. He talked about the weather on his HOMEWORLD, about the spring migrations of a large grazing animal he had spent decades managing, about a fence line he had rebuilt 4 times because the soil composition on that particular ridge never held posts correctly. He was not performing. He was not using a calm voice as a technique. He was just a man who had spent his life around animals and had learned, sometime in those 41 years, that presence is different from pressure. On the 43rd morning of his rotation, I walked across the enclosure and lay down against his left side. He didn't move for a long time. Then carefully, he set the tin cup down and put his hand on my back between my shoulders where the scale ridge runs and kept it there with no weight at all, just contact, just warmth. His heartbeat was slower than I expected. It said, "I have been here before." It said, "I know how to hold still." I stayed for the full rest period. When I stood to move, he let me go without following, without reaching, without the cortisol spike of a being who was afraid the moment was ending. The researchers who had been observing through the glass were holding a very quiet argument on the other side of it. I could see them but not hear them. I did not need to hear them. Their gestures were clear enough. Several of them appeared to be pointing at DAVIN-RAEL and then at their documentation boards. He did not notice. He was refilling the trough. The grown Vorrkai and the neighboring pens knew before the researchers did. They always do. We communicate in ranges that the station's instrumentation was not calibrated to detect, and what moved through the enclosure walls that afternoon was not complicated. It was simply, this one. This is the one who sits with us. It moved outward from K3 to the adjacent holding units, and when DAVIN-RAEL walked through the main corridor that evening on his way to the service exit, the 2 adult Vorrkai in Pen 7 pressed to their fence line and watched him pass. He nodded at them the way you nod at neighbors whose names you haven't learned yet. They held the fence line until he was gone. He did not mention it in his shift log. The months passed. Oru grew to full shoulder height in the winter quarter, long and pale-scaled, 190 kilograms of reach and speed. Thresh grew broader across the chest than either of us, those wide paws finding their purpose in a frame that was all dense muscle and short fuse reaction time. I grew, too. By the spring assessment, we were the largest Vorrkai cohort on station, and the research team had flagged our enclosure for a revised handling protocol. They wanted to reintroduce the containment armor. They were not wrong to want this. We were no longer cubs, but the conversation never advanced far, because every time they discussed it, the footage from the observation glass showed Davin Rail sitting in the corner with his tin cup, while Thresh napped across his feet and Oru used his thigh as a pillow. And no one could quite figure out how to present the armor recommendation without it looking like an admission that the protocol had failed from the beginning. It had failed from the beginning, but that is not a thing bureaucracies say plainly. The new station warden arrived in early summer, a Velharan male named Oreth Save, sent by the Outer Reach Conservation Authority to run an efficiency review after the previous warden's retirement. Oreth Save had credentials. He had a long record of operational restructuring at 3 other preserve stations. He spent his first 2 weeks reviewing assignment logs, credential rosters, and cost tables. On the 18th day of his review, he summoned Davin Rail to the administrative module. I know what was said because the station's internal communication system runs through the same conduit bundle that passes the east wall of our enclosure, and the Velharan use a frequency band we hear very clearly. Oreth Save told Davin Rail that his credential coding was insufficient for a primary handler role on a Class 4 Predator unit, that the station's insurance underwriting required certified xenobiological training for that designation, and that he was being reassigned to the transit logistics pool effective the following morning. He said it in the tone of a person who has said this kind of thing many times and does not feel it requires explanation. Davin Rail said, "All right." That was all. He came the next morning anyway to finish his shift. The trough needed the weekly deep clean and the feed ledge calibration was due, and these things did not care about administrative schedules. He filled the trough. He ran the calibration. He sat in the corner for the rest period and drank from his tin cup. At the end of the shift he stood, put the cup in his pocket, picked up his tools, and walked toward the service exit. The security team was waiting outside it. 2 Velharan officers in station authority kit, sent by Oreth Save to confirm the reassignment was complete. I do not know what they intended exactly. Perhaps only to escort him to his new post. Perhaps to ensure he did not return. I know what we intended. Sekit is the Alpha. When I moved to the door, Oru and Thresh were already there, because we have been a pack since before we opened our eyes, and we do not need words for this. We positioned ourselves between Davin Rail and the exit, between him and the 2 officers beyond it, and we stopped. We did not snarl. We did not charge. We did not display in any of the ways that would have put the situation into a category the station's threat response protocols knew how to handle. We simply stood in the space between him and the door, all 3 of us at full height, and we did not move. Davin Rail stood behind us for a moment. Then he set down his tool bag. He put his hand on my back between the shoulders, the same place it had gone on the 43rd morning. No pressure, just wait. He said quietly to no one in particular, "Easy." That was all he said. Oreth Save was at the observation glass. I could see his reflection in it, the forward lean, the cortisol spike, the slight backward step that his body made before his mind caught up to it. He stood there for a long time. Then he lifted his wrist pad and spoke into it. The 2 officers outside the exit withdrew. Davin Rail waited until they were gone. Then he picked up his tool bag. He looked down at us, not in the way of a person confirming dominance, not in the way of a person performing gratitude, just a look, the way you look at something you have known a long time. He said, "Water trough needs a second flush. I'll get it tomorrow." Then he walked back to the trough and ran the second flush cycle. His credential designation was updated to Primary Handler Class 4 2 weeks later. The paperwork cited an emergency continuity provision. Oreth Save did not contest it. We do not know what a home is. in the way that word is used by species who build them. We know a territory. We know a pack. We know the warm corner by the east wall and the sound of water going into the trough and the weight of a hand that holds still and asks nothing. I have thought about it in the long way that a pack animal thinks, not in words, but in the sense of a thing that settles and stays. He did not choose us. He was assigned to us by accident because the roster was short and nobody else was available. And he filled the trough and sat down and did not want anything from us, and that was enough. That was more than enough. That was the rarest thing we had ever encountered, in all the enclosures and all the handlers and all the careful armor that said, "I am afraid of what you are." He was not afraid, he was just there. We are Vorrkai. We do not bond to individuals of other species. We bonded to this one.